Is the Kaziranga National Park in danger? I want to remind you that the Kaziranga is home to India's one horned rhino that was hunted to the brink of extinction and then saved and brought back in Kaziranga over the last several years. Now, if the rhino survived extinction, can it survive development inside and around its park? That's the question we are asking. And we're asking this question because Himanta Biswa Sarma's Assam government has now suggested that it will go to the central government and ask for a 1 kilometer buffer zone around the park instead of the 10-kilometer buffer zone the park currently enjoys. So, what is going to happen to the rhinos and the elephants and the buffaloes and everything that lives in this national park that's also a UNESCO site? That's the question we're asking. Before we go further, remember like, share, subscribe, and sign up for our membership where you'll get a news bulletin every day, which we put out in an audio form to remove all the trauma from the news and give you just the information. Okay, let's talk about what's happening in Kaziranga. The Assam government has said that they will approach the center for a proposal to restrict Kaziranga's eco-sensitive zone to just 1 kilometer. There are two arguments. The government says the restriction of that buffer zone will actually allow development. It's currently being held back from developing that area. Roads, civic infrastructure has all been stalled because of the national park. And it's also proposing a modern stadium and a convention center at the national park. Now, obviously, environmentalists are shocked by this proposal. They're saying the Kaziranga will not survive as an ecological island. Animals need to move beyond the park boundary wall. Floodplains and wildlife corridors need to extend around it. In order to fully understand this, let's go step by step, right? So, my first step and my first question is this: what is this eco sensitive zone we're talking about? Now, the eco sensitive zone is not the national park itself. Now, remember, within the national park, zero development is allowed. Outside the national park, what is called a buffer zone or the eco sensitive zone, is a buffer zone that is allowed for animals to wander outside of that park. Now, what this means is that wildlife doesn't understand a border drawn on a government map. They don't know that the national park has ended. They will wander outside that park, and it's important to keep space for them in order to keep the animals safe, in order to keep people safe, and not allow pollution, not allow mining, not allow construction, traffic, noise pollution. So that is what a buffer zone normally looks like. Now, an environment sensitive zone is not a blanket ban. So it, for example, will not allow polluting industries inside of that zone. It will not allow commercial mining. It will not, it won't allow any of these big constructions. Hotels, resorts, tree cutting, road construction, all of this requires heavy environment clearances, and it depends on many notifications and laws to actually do any sort of construction in that buffer zone. But normal agriculture, normal, especially people who are of the tribal community are allowed to continue to live there, have their villages there, and continue their livelihood. Now, this is not a choice between protecting animals and letting people live nearby. It's about the kind of development that should be allowed in this buffer zone. Now, the second question we have to answer at this point is, why is Kaziranga so important? And why is it shocking for environmentalists that the government would even suggest this? Kaziranga is not just a normal forest, it is 43,000 hectares of a UNESCO heritage site. And UNESCO describes it as the single largest undisturbed representative area of the Brahmaputra Valley floodplain. And that is really the most important thing. The word floodplain on this, on this description. Kaziranga has 2,613 one-horned rhinos as per the census in 2022. It has 148 tigers. It has over 1,400 elephants. And I want to remind you that in 1999, the rhinos were at 1,500 and they are now at 2,600. So that rhino population from the baseline has really climbed up, and it's because this area is protected. Now, it's also, apart from the rhino, there's water buffalo, swamp deer, bear, the Gangetic dolphin, who is also endangered, an extraordinary bird life. So that success story that I was telling you about the conservation of the rhino from where it was in 1999 to where it is today. And the interesting thing about the Kaziranga, like I said, is that it's a floodplain, which means that we've seen right now Assam is actually going through a flood. Assam floods off the Brahmaputra floodplains every year, and this is getting worse with climate change. When the Brahmaputra floods every year, not if, when, and the entire park nearly sometimes goes underwater. The wildlife moves out of the low lying areas towards higher ground, specifically at the Karbi Hills. Now, this is the buffer zone that needs protection because the animals don't know that you have actually reduced their space from 10 kilometers to 1 kilometer as a radius. They have to go where they think they are safe every year. And by cutting this space, you're actually cutting off that higher ground that the animals normally naturally move into. Now, what is it the Assam government actually wants to change when it comes to Kaziranga? That's the important question to ask. The government's argument is that a 1 kilometer eco-sensitive zone, will actually give them a clearer boundary for development, and they will bring in development. They will bring in, like I said, a modern stadium, other civic infrastructure projects, and they want to draw a balance between development and conservation. This is what the difference will look like. Now, this is just a proposal. There's a park, obviously, and the broad buffer zone will actually get cut to 1 kilometer. And automatically, what will happen is animals will wander into spaces where humans actually are. This is what is being proposed already around the Kaziranga area. There's a hotel by a wildlife luxury resort by Hyatt of 115 rooms, around 10 acres, which is 7.2 kilometers from the park boundary. This is as per documents that have been placed before the National Green Tribunal, which is like the Supreme Court for environment issues. Then there is a Tata Group India Hotels company, apparently, along with Assam Tourism and Amalgamated Plantations, that's also looking at another sort of tea estate possibility. A five-star hotel, two high-end tea resorts, a new guest house with a convention center at Kaziranga. These are all things that the Assam government is already proposing. And the forest department, in documents that they have placed in court, has said that the land for that Hyatt hotel falls within the eco-sensitive zone around Kaziranga, and there's already been its contentions on it. There have been protests. Pranab Dole, who is an indigenous lands right activist, was campaigning for the community land and against the Hyatt Hotel. He was actually picked up because the police alleged that he and a group of people actually entered into a space that they shouldn't have entered into. So there were criminal charges of trespassing and intimidation and obstructing public servants. He was arrested in Guwahati. The local court granted him bail, and then the Assam government detained him again under the National Security Act. So, the interesting thing to remember about this entire fight is not that the Kaziranga already has 10 kilometers and the government is shrinking it to 1 kilometer. The Kaziranga does not have a notified special environment sensitive zone. So, that's what it means. It doesn't mean that the government is taking what is 10 kilometers and making it 1 kilometer. The government was supposed to have clearly earmarked and proposed, and they're now choosing to propose a lower sensitive zone. This actually came up because the case came before the Guwahati High Court. And in the Guwahati High Court, the court noted that Kaziranga does not have a finally notified eco-sensitive zone. There's no draft proposal kept before the government or before the High Court. And the court basically said, in the absence of a proposal, the protections directed by the court will apply, which means those 10 kilometers will apply. So now, if the government places a proposal, it will be the proposal that will then apply. Why are environmentalists worried? Environmentalists are worried for these reasons. Now, Aruba Goswami, who is a Guwahati based environment activist and a journalist, has said that the shrinking protective area will threaten wildlife. There's also a worry that basically breeding grounds and grasslands sustain wildlife, and the compromise on those will actually hit wildlife completely. It isn't just about buildings. It's not about the fact that there will be a five-star that will come up here. It's about the fact that in order to service that five-star, there will be more roads, there will be more traffic, there will be more artificial lighting that will be brought into the forest area, there will be more noise, more tourism, greater pressure on the water that is available in that area. There will be habitat fragmenting. So we've noticed that this happens all over the country. Wherever there is a road, what happens is it becomes more and more dangerous for animals to cross over. And when animals can't cross over, half their habitat is lost on the other side. Animals are not able to breed across the habitat, and that actually causes inbreeding and makes them sick. There is broken movement routes. Like I said, they can't cross over onto the other side when one side floods. And so there are many issues that come with construction inside of those zones. In case of Kaziranga, movement matters especially because animals have to periodically leave the national park when it does flood. The Assam government's counter argument here is that a clearly marked eco-sensitive zone will provide clarity, and that will actually allow them to balance between development and conservation, which is really important for them to be able to do. But the debate doesn't exist in isolation. I want to show you another thing that happened. Back in September 2020, there was a proposal that was placed before the Assam government to suggest that an additional 2,570 hectares of forest land be added to the Kaziranga in order to get more protection. And the point behind this was that this was a ravine landscape where the rhinos, the elephants, the water buffaloes, the tigers, and other wildlife tend to roam. It was by the river, and the islands provide connectivity to Kaziranga. Four rhinos were actually spotted in that location as well. That was back in the year 2020. In 2025, the Assam government basically just cancelled that notification with immediate effect. And so those 2,500 hectares never got added to the national park. And the reversal was criticized because obviously conservationists argued that that connectivity really mattered. That they felt that cancelling it meant that the government was considering development in the area, which seems to actually have been the case. And the government's response was we need to balance between development and between protecting the landscape, which is how we have gotten to this point here, which is why I'm bringing it up. So in September 2020, there was a notification. In June 2025, that notification was cancelled. In June, July, a protest started based on that Hyatt proposal and the site. And then there was obviously arrest based on NSA. And now the Assam government is saying that it will seek only a 1 kilometer eco-sensitive zone. So this was the journey that brought us to this, proposal that the government has now put before us. So the question to ask is not does the Kaziranga need 10 kilometers or 1 kilometer? The question to ask is what does the science say about protection? The science says that the eco-sensitive zone is not supposed to be an arbitrary circle drawn around a national park. It is supposed to be based on a study of what exactly the animals need. Where do they roam? How much space do they need? If their numbers are growing, do they need more space? And if you bring in construction and you bring in noise pollution, water pollution, air pollution, drilling, more cars in that neighborhood, more light pollution in that space, what impact will it have on the animals? And we've seen this in most of our big centers that once you change the notification and you allow a single brick to be laid, it's a slippery slope from there because then construction just goes on willy nilly. Proposals are presented and permissions are given, and it's only later that courts get involved in whether or not that should have actually come up. So technically the question we are asking here is this: as a country that obviously takes conservation very, very seriously, is this something we are comfortable with? What does the science actually tell us? Is it so necessary to have development in that neighborhood? And I invite you as the audience to actually give me your answer, because the government's argument is that there are people living in that neighborhood who don't have access to roads. They don't have access to infrastructure that they should have, which everybody else in the country has, which is a fair argument. But when you put in your five-star hotels and you put in your stadiums and your convention centers, will the local people actually benefit, or will it be the people in power who benefit? Let me know what you think.